Moldovan President Maya Sandu has accused Russia of plotting to overthrow her country's pro-Western government. The death toll in the wake of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria has reached over 30,000 people. And I present to you a view of the world that tries to explain such random tragedy. Dianne Feinstein, California's longest-serving senator, announces that she will not seek re-election in 2024. Boy, we will really miss her. And finally, the CDC has released a stunning study about the record rates of depression in young women. So I attempt to answer the question, why are so many of us so depressed? I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Friends, it's Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. I hope that you had a great Valentine's Day yesterday. I'm going to be wearing red all week just in the spirit of the holiday. And just as I was sitting down to film, my dear Shanzi, my lovely producer, brought me a Valentine of his own, a heart-shaped donut. How cute is that? Too bad I don't like donuts, which he should know because he's known me for 2 years. So one thing, the sweet I don't like, actually that's not true. I don't really like cake either, interestingly. I like cake batter, but not cake. I'm a cookie brownie girl, and cupcakes are bad too. Anyway, this show is not about my taste in desserts. It is about serious stuff. So let's go on to the news. In fact, this story is incredibly serious and also terrifying, but unfortunately not surprising knowing this vicious, evil dictator, Vladimir Putin. The Moldovan president, Maya Sandu, accused Russia of plotting to overthrow her country's pro-Western government. Now, as background, she won in a landslide in 2020 after campaigning on a closer relationship with the West and specifically the European Union. And this past June of 2022, the European Union actually announced that they had voted to accept Moldova as a candidate to potentially join the group. Moldova is a country that is quite small. It's located between Ukraine and Romania. It has a population of only about 2.6 million people. And over the past year, it has taken in about 109,000 Ukrainian refugees, which is obviously a big amount, period, but especially given the already small size of that population. And this is probably in part why Russia is showing aggression towards Moldova, because they are trying to help Ukraine. Also, the per capita GDP of Moldova is less than $5,300. That's according to stats in 2021. And the annual inflation in the country is a staggering 27%. Now, probably the most important piece of background information to know about Moldova is that it was one of the 15 former Soviet socialist republics under the Soviet Union, which, of course, existed from 1917 to 1991. So Ms. Sandu has now publicly said that Russia had a plan that, quote, included sabotage and militarily trained people disguised as civilians to carry out violent actions, attacks on government buildings, and taking hostages again to effect a regime change. Now, Ms. Sandu's remarks come just a few days after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukrainian intelligence had uncovered a plot, they called it a, quote, detailed Russian plan to destabilize Moldova and again effect regime change. Now, I want to take a minute to explain to you Russia's point of view in all of this, why they are so intent, seemingly, on affecting a regime change in Moldova. And some of this also explains why they invaded Ukraine in the first place. Now, a lot of Americans, when we talk about trying to understand the enemy's point of view, seem to dislike that kind of thinking. They view it as defeatism or being insufficiently committed to victory or siding or sympathizing with the enemy. But I've never really understood that. Does someone who tries to figure out ways a burglar could break into their home and business want to be burglarized? Of course not. But considering, again, how someone who is your adversary views the world can help you figure out how to best react. So with regard to Moldova, as I said, it was a former socialist Soviet republic. There were, it's a little complicated because there were 15 in total, but one of those 15 was the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, and then there were 14 others in addition to Russia under the Soviet Union. Those others included Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and of course, Ukraine, just to name a few. As I have said on this program before, but it's really, really important that all of us understand, the Soviet Union, in addition to these SSRs, also exercised huge dominion, almost an imperial-like reach over those few decades in the 20th century. They had puppet governments in Eastern Europe, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria are some of the principal examples. They also had great influence in Afghanistan, in Cuba, and several countries in Latin America. And in 1991, all of that went away for the Soviet Union. And so many Russians today believe that there has been a catastrophic fall from grace. And that is in large part why they have invaded Ukraine, which is 1/28th the size of the vast territory of Russia. And it's probably why Putin is stepping up the ante with regard to Moldova. Also, historically, Putin has made it very clear that he does not like it when former SSRs assume closer ties with the West and with the United States. An inflection point in all of this history happened in 2008 at the NATO summit. Now, NATO, of course, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it is a group of Western, primarily allies, who are militarily bonded to each other in an effort to help one another should war break out again. And over the past few decades since NATO's founding, it has tried to include more states that are not really typically Western, but that actually were once under the dominion of the Soviet Union. So in 1999, several Baltic states were admitted, and in 2008, it was announced that Ukraine and Georgia would be next in line for NATO membership, and this was heavily pushed by our president at the time, George W. Bush. What happened, though, after that, in 2008, and this is something that we all forget, but it explains so much, is that in the wake of that announcement that Georgia and Ukraine would be next for NATO membership, Putin immediately invaded Georgia within just about 4 months of that proclamation. He seized the territories of Abkhazia, which is spelled Abkhazia. I think I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I did not. But that's the first territory that he seized. And the second one is South Ossetia. And those two together constitute about 20% of the country of Georgia. They also threw the president at the time, who was pro-Western, into prison, where he remains today. And he actually wrote a Wall Street Journal article recently, which was just terrifying and devastating and stunning to read about, that he actually gave to his mother from prison in Georgia, where he said that he was being tortured and deprived of food and water and treated horribly. And he pleaded to the West to do something about Ukraine and to help Georgia. So also, after Putin invaded Georgia, there was another attempt by NATO to try to bring Ukraine and Georgia into its group. And what happened then was the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine in 2014, which is where Ukrainians rose up and ousted a pro-Russian leader in exchange for a pro-Western leader who wanted to align Ukraine more with the European Union, with NATO, and away from the formerly Soviet-aligned countries. So what did Putin do in 2014 after this Maidan revolution? Well, he invaded Crimea. And he also put Russian troops in the eastern part of Ukraine called the Donbass region, which some of you have heard of today because it is very prominent in this current war, this current invasion of Ukraine. It's the part of Ukraine that had once been a part of the Russian Empire, and it is heavily populated by Ukrainians who are sympathetic to Russia and who speak Russian. The Donbass consists of two provinces known as Oblasts, Donetsk and Luhansk. So again, it is just important for us to understand, that does not mean endorse, but understand why Putin is behaving in the way that he is now, and hopefully that can help us inform a better response. Now on to other international news. Turkish authorities have arrested dozens of individuals who they say are allegedly involved in shoddy construction practices that led to such destruction in the wake of the 7.8 and the 7.5 magnitude earthquakes that shook both Turkey and Syria 2 weeks ago. The death toll in the wake of these earthquakes has just been unbelievable. The recent numbers reveal that it has reached over 35,000 people in Turkey. That's how many who have died. 31,000 injuries as well in Turkey. And in Syria, the death toll is at about 3,500 people. So this may seem a little bit like a 180, but I would like to bring a philosopher to your attention as I discuss the destruction in the wake of these earthquakes. Because when you see, at least when I see events like this on the news, I think, why is the world this way? In some ways, you can understand certain instances of suffering in the world that are human inflicted. Because if you subscribe to the Judeo-Christian worldview, you believe that suffering and evil are unfortunate but necessary byproducts of God giving us free will. And in order to give us the right to make our own choices, he also gives us the right to make poor choices, which can, again, lead to instances of terrible suffering. But when you see something like an earthquake happen, that's not human-induced. So why do these seemingly random tragedies happen that cause so many people to die, cause so many people's lives to be ruined? It just doesn't seem to make sense. So in college, I took this marvelous philosophy course, which I really pushed myself to take. I didn't want to, but I was so glad at the end of the day that I did. And I learned about this German philosopher who attempts to answer this question. His name is Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz. And he wrote this book in 1710 called Theodicy. By the way, oh, there he is. God, isn't he a cutie? I asked Sean to put a picture of him. Note sarcasm. By the way, I think that's a wig that he has on. All the philosophers at that time wore a wig. So he wrote this book, Theodicy, in 1710, and he tries to make sense of the divine order of the universe. And he coined the name of the book, that term theodicy, which is actually two Greek words that are put together. They're the two terms for God and justice. And accordingly, his book is a defense of the justice of God. And the reason why I bring this guy up with regard to this earthquake story is that actually another earthquake that happened about 300 years ago reinvigorated this theodicy debate. So Leibniz was born in the middle of the 17th century. He died in like 1718 or 1716, a few years after he wrote Theodicy. And what really made Leibniz famous was the Lisbon earthquake that happened a few decades after he died in 1755. It was an earthquake, obviously, in Lisbon, Portugal, that wreaked enormous destruction. It was actually on All Saints' Day, which is a day where many hundreds of people were gathering in church. And the earthquake, in addition to just immediately causing structures to collapse and killing people, it also produced a fire, and 30,000 people in total died in Lisbon. So again, this earthquake reopened the Theodicy debate, which was kind of dead when Leibniz died. And Voltaire, another philosopher, in the wake of this Lisbon earthquake, went back to Leibniz's book Theodicy and said, let's look at what this guy was arguing, because Voltaire disagreed with it. But I think that Leibniz's argument, even if I may not be sure about what I think about it in terms of whether I agree or disagree, I think it's very interesting and compelling, and it's worth all of us knowing. So again, Leibniz would talk about evil and free will, and how some instances of suffering are because of our free will. But he mainly attempts to answer this question about things like earthquakes, random acts of destruction. And he starts his book with the premise that there is a just God, that justice is a timeless, unchanging, see how I put the word timeless in there, but it's true. He believes justice is a timeless, unchanging, eternal standard, and it governs every rational good mind, including God's. And so Leibniz says that if there is a God that is omnipotent and perfectly just, he will always do the just thing. But then as we look around in the world and we see all this undeserved suffering, Leibniz asks, how do we square that circle? And the answer is that he offers this idea that the world is just by saying that what a perfectly just and benevolent God would do is that he would create the best world possible. Leibniz says that God would have a reason to create a world rather than no world, and Leibniz thinks that reason is that that world has more goodness in it than any other conceivable world that we could imagine. So he's not saying that this world has no bad in it, but he's saying that this world, even with earthquakes and tsunamis and all of these horrible things, is the best world possible. And so he speculates that there must be a need for some bad in the world in order for it to be a kind of world that accommodates the greatest amount of goodness. We can't understand some of these random things that happen, Leibniz says, because of the limitations of our mind. And some higher infinite mind would be able to understand some of these random parts of the world. But his main thesis statement is that we must infer, because God is perfectly just, we must infer that he chose the best possible world. Voltaire thinks Leibniz is an idiot. But Leibniz says if you take away something like earthquakes, that wouldn't be the world that we live in. It's like trying to bake chocolate chip cookies, but taking away chocolate chips as an ingredient. It wouldn't be the same. So earthquakes, just like the chocolate and the chocolate chip cookies, is a part of what this human world consists of, and you wouldn't have a human world without it. And so Leibniz would say that we can't understand why or how that works, and we can't compare this world to what a world without earthquakes would look like, because that would be unfathomable to us. But he's essentially saying that there is a spiritual interrelatedness of the world that we cannot understand. Now, again, I'm bringing this up to you, not to ask you to endorse it or to even say that I endorse it. But I think it's interesting and important for all of us to contemplate these questions instead of just watching some of these random instances of suffering on the news and not understanding and going along with our day. I think it is life enriching to consider what might be at play. And anyway, I just thought Leibniz's argument in my philosophy class was quite interesting. I'm sure if my professor is watching me now, he'd be very proud that I'm bringing it up. Now on to less lofty topics. Dianne Feinstein has announced that she is not seeking re-election in 2024. And to that, I say, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Miss Feinstein is the longest serving California senator. She's been in office actually since 1992. She's also the former mayor of San Francisco. And we can just all see the way California has turned out under her tenure. If you look at the top states in the union that people are leaving in order to go to other states, all of the top 10 are Democrat states, and all of the states that people are moving towards are Republican states. And unfortunately, in that number one slot is California, which is crazy to think about, given our weather, given our infrastructure, given our abundance of natural resources, our once thriving economy. It shows you the extent to which our leaders have done us wrong. So can't say I'm sad to see Senator Feinstein go, but we can only rejoice for just a few moments because unfortunately, the people who are up to take her seat do not seem to be any better. Nancy Pelosi has said that she supports Representative Adam Schiff to replace Dianne Feinstein, which, yeah, if you could see my producer now, Sean, he has his head in his hands. I echo you, my friend. Looks like we're just swapping in bad for worse, but maybe that isn't true. Maybe there will be some kind of miracle where we will elect a leader who actually does his or her job, but I am not holding my breath. Finally, there has been a new CDC study that has come out recently that has said 3 out of 5 high school girls in the United States that were surveyed reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2021. Now, this study is getting so much attention because it is the first that the CDC has conducted after the pandemic. And the results show a 60% increase in these reports of these bad feelings over the past decade. It's increased 60%. In 2021, 57% of high school girls reported these feelings compared to 36% in 2011. 30% also reported that they have seriously considered suicide, which is, again, up a lot from just 19%. I shouldn't say just, any amount is terrible, but comparatively to now, just 19% in 2011. And for boys, all of these numbers are still significant, but consistently less. 29% that they felt those feelings, those persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and 14% of the boys surveyed said that they have seriously considered suicide. There's also data in this study pertaining to instances of sexual violence. For instance, 18% of high school girls surveyed reported that they've experienced high levels of sexual violence, and that is compared with 5% of boys surveyed who say that they experience the same thing. As a 23-year-old female myself, not far from this age group, I would like to humbly offer some of my speculations as to why this is. But first, let's get some of the obvious causes out of the way. First of all, obviously hormones are very real in this age range. It's natural to experience a lot of confusion with regard to your emotions as your body is undergoing a lot of changes. There is a reason why people make so many movies about the how hard high school is. I mean, it's a bad time. So it's not exactly a total shock that high schoolers are saying that they are struggling. Also, no doubt the pandemic contributed to these numbers. Test scores are at an all-time low, and recently there's been data that's come out that has said that as many as 1.2 million public school students exited the classroom after the pandemic and have not returned to the public school system. And of course, as we all know, during the pandemic, we were siloed and stunted. We couldn't interact with one another. And I think the worst thing about COVID, especially for people my age, is that it gave us all an excuse to pause our lives and indulge our passivity. I was speaking with someone recently who was telling me that he doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life. And by the way, At our age, that's very common and not really anything to be too concerned about. It's natural. But one of the things that he said, and I thought it was remarkably honest, was when he was home during the pandemic living with his parents, he said, it kind of gave me an excuse to not advance myself in my career, not go out on dates, not push myself to develop new friendships. It kind of gave us all this very easy thing to fall back on and go, well, I really should be doing this, but it's the pandemic, so I can't. And I think that has really caught up to a lot of us in our lives now, and certainly it has for those who are younger, who really do need those formative years to develop their identities, their friendships, and all of those important personal infrastructure building things, as I like to say. But even more than these obvious causes that I just outlined, puberty and the pandemic, I would like to offer, again, a few speculations of my own. The first one, I think a lot of young people are depressed because everything nowadays is so negative. And when you're hearing me say this, you're probably thinking that I'm referring to the news. And certainly that's true. Every single day of my job, when I'm telling you about the latest manufacturing of Iranian drones, or North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile parade, or Adam Schiff possibly replacing Dianne Feinstein, I think to myself, my gosh, I'm just kind of bombarding them with bad news. So I completely understand how the news can be discouraging to people. But really, when I say that everything is negative, I'm not so much referring to the news, because frankly, the news is always negative. There's always horrible things going on in the world. What I'm referring to is that in American society nowadays, we have reduced so much around us to dust. We have called great heroes and people in our culture racist and homophobic and transphobic. All of our institutions are all of these terrible things. All of these people who we revered and we erected statues to honor were secretly a-holes. And although one may not think that this has any kind of bearing on one's psyche, it does. When you aren't proud of your culture or your heritage or your country, that's a very sad thing. Imagine, and I don't think many people do unfortunately have to imagine it, it's a very tragic and real phenomena. Imagine not being proud of your family or of your home life. All of us have experienced disappointment with regard to loved ones, tragedy, and that weighs on you. And that is certainly the same thing with our country. I have a friend from college who is not from the United States, and I asked her once, I said, what was the biggest culture shock for you coming to school in America? And I thought her response was so interesting. She said, in my country, when we have a remarkable athlete or scholar or someone who's accomplished something great, we plaster them on the cover of all of our newspapers and we put them on the television. This ice skater won gold at the Olympic Games. And she said everyone in our country rallies around this individual and is so proud to share a national heritage. And she said, it's just crazy to me that you Americans don't do that, because daily you have so many people to be proud of. Again, not just athletes, but thinkers, students, commentators, everyday people. There are a lot of people in our society who are doing great things, and we don't elevate them, and we don't seem to share a common sense of American identity. And what a shame it is to untether yourself from something so beautiful. So that's my speculation, number one, the shame of feeling proud to be American. If you go up to people, not just young people, but most people in society today, and you say to them, what does it mean to be American? I don't think most people could provide an answer for you. And it's shocking to me that people continue to deny that this is not a crucial component of our collective malaise. Okay, again, that's number one. Number two is that increasingly today, our society, in addition to telling us that we don't have anything to be proud of, is rewarding bad character traits. increasingly fewer and fewer things anymore are based on merit. And it is very demoralizing when you see undeserving people get rewarded for things. Or on the flip side, deserving people not getting rewarded for things. There's been a story that's been circulating around, I guess it's been circulating around a lot of places, but it's mostly been reported on by conservative talk show hosts. And it's that schools around the country are not reporting their national merit scholars anymore publicly to other members of the school, because they say that it is going to hurt fellow students' feelings if they did not receive that national merit designation. And I have heard from many people who are a few years younger than I, who go to both public and private schools in Los Angeles, that their schools have embraced these crazy policies where they will not hand out. We seem to live in this world where everyone gets a trophy, but now we're seeming to go into a world where no one gets a trophy, where they won't confer annual awards that they would usually do at the school, or they allow people to retake tests because apparently that's equity. And I just can't, thank God I'm not in school anymore, and thank God I'm in a workplace that rewards people based on merit, because I can't imagine what it must do to someone to think, no matter how hard I work, it won't be rewarded, it won't be celebrated because it's not PC to celebrate me. Or frankly, we see people getting elevated and gaining admission to places or getting jobs because of their race or their sexuality or their gender or some other characteristic that has nothing to do with their competence. Again, that gives people an idea that they are not worthy. And especially this is most prevalent in schools and among young people. So again, that's theory number 2 of why I think so many high schoolers are feeling so persistently sad and hopeless. That's the key word in the study, hopeless. And finally, my third supposition, if you will, is that many people in the high school age range and many people in our country writ large are spiritually suffocated. Many of us do not have a strong religious worldview. We don't have a set of values or beliefs that we place higher than ourselves and that we follow, whether or not it personally or professionally advantages us. And I'm not necessarily saying, though I think it would be great and I think it would make a lot of people happier, that all of us necessarily need to go back to 50 or 60 years ago where people always went to church every Sunday and very strictly observed religious law. I'm not necessarily advocating for a complete return to that, but what I am saying is that we have lost so much and our day-to-day lives have been so diminished as a result of the secularism that has invaded and infected every single institution, every single, almost I should say, every single worldview in our country. I was one of those secular people who didn't have something greater and beyond myself that I really believed in for most of my life. And about 3 years ago, that all changed when I read Dennis Prager's Rational Bible Commentary. And I don't know how I theologically identify right now, but I do know that I believe in God. And I do know that having a spiritual and religious worldview has transformed my life more than just about anything else. Having that kind of worldview, I liken it to putting glasses on and everything around you, every one of your day-to-day interactions become transformed. My secular life was so devoid of meaning. And I think without a strong spiritual worldview, you think that whatever is happening to you at the moment is all there is. You lose that profound sense that there is something deeper in life. And also, you lose the sense that there is purpose to tragedy, to setback, to suffering. With a spiritual worldview, you see that there is something ennobling about those things. So again, it makes sense why so many of these young people are feeling so hopeless and so down, because they don't have, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, and as I say a lot, a strong personal infrastructure and framework that can help them push through tough moments. And I certainly hope to be an example to young people and any people of how to, as I like to say at the end, think clearly, choose wisely, and act with principle and determination. Thank you all very much for joining us today. I kind of got over my skis there by usually saying I said my ending thing too soon, but you know what I would say. And please carry on throughout your day and this week, adopting those very important sentiments. And I will see you tomorrow. Take care.